the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse. What the heck's wrong with you? It's free. Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplaces can fix our world, like we say every single week, drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. I was just at I'll talk about this in a second, but this is our greatest asset. Our greatest asset is this community we're a part of. It's an asset that is unique to our industry, this highly collegial industry where you can reach out across the aisle, even to your counterpart at a competitor to get some help. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat, expand that network a bit, and connect with at least one person today. We got a real treat for you today. We are talking about maintaining a strong case for compliance. There's a lot of panic in our space right now with all these executive orders flying around. What does the future hold? So we're going to be diving into this topic today. And I got a couple announcements like I always do. I would love for you guys to drop your favorite podcast in the chat. It doesn't have to be the ethics experts, okay? Drop your favorite podcast in our space in the chat. There's so much great thought leadership coming out constantly. There's books being written. There's writing happening. There are phenomenal podcasts. So check out our Ethico library. We have a ton of thought leadership captured there. This is where we pull from when people win books, which I'll talk about here in a second. And share that. Go ahead and share that in the chat. The Ethics Experts is coming up close to our 200th episode. We got a lot of great episodes coming out. A big surprise for the 200th episode. So if you have not subscribed yet, you really ought to. Fastest growing ethics and compliance podcast in the world. Top 2% global podcast. So people care about business ethics, which is phenomenal. Speaking of business ethics and speaking of compliance, if you have not updated your homepage yet to Radical Compliance and you have not signed up for the newsletter, you absolutely need to. Matt Kelly is, he's my guy, anything smart, you hear me say, I probably stole it from the Radical Compliance blog. Constant great content. So hit this QR code or just go right to Radical Compliance and save that to your favorites. So, I'm spending some time talking about the Ethico ecosystem. This is your answer to the old solution you might be using. Maybe it's a solution that sounded really great and it's kind of fallen off. Maybe you've inherited it. Maybe you just want to see what else is out there. Our system is purpose-built for ethics and compliance to drive effectiveness, to drive more engagement and more efficiency in your process so you can direct your limited resources to the things that are going to move the needle the most. Check us out on G2. I'm not going to sit here and sell you. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes that kind of underscore this Promised Land promotion. So if you're coming from Navex, you're coming from EQS/OneTrust/Conversant/whatever, we have up to a year free. Of course, there's some restrictions in place and up to 15% off of your bill. So you can really level up your program, step that up. But a big concern that people have in making a change like this, who wants to move, right? I'm in the process of moving right now. Moving sucks. But a big impediment for people making this move is the pain of the move itself. So I want to share a couple of quick quotes for you as you're all going to G2 to read these reviews and signing up for demos. Very easy and efficient move from Navex to Ethico. Very helpful support and communication. Marissa was very helpful and professional throughout the entire project. Implementation consultants were quick to answer questions, no matter how crazy the question was, and within the same day usually. We have yet to do the data implementation from our old solution, but don't anticipate any issues. Easiest implementation I have been involved with in a long time. So it ain't as bad as you think, okay? So if you're interested in checking that out, go ahead and do that. And finally, we had our first Ethicsverse live event yesterday. So this year we're going to be going around to various cities. We're coming to a city near you to either do a roundtable, a small kind of intimate lunch with other professionals talking about the topics du jour, the tactics, the strategies that we're using to, navigate during this difficult time. And we're also going to have a handful of forums. These are going to be longer events in the evenings with some speakers and some opportunities to network. Of course, it's all free because we love you. So that our first forum is coming up next month in Charlotte. So if you were not able to make that event yesterday, you absolutely should come to this forum. I guarantee it'll be great. And if it's not, then you can leave. Okay. All right. With that, passing it over to the coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly. Let's see a nice emoji explosion. We got some new panelists. We got some genius coming for you today. So keep those comments in the chat. Keep those questions coming in the chat. And we're going to be giving away 5 copies of this new book. We just did an interview with these folks on the Ethics Experts. This is Powerful Phrases to Avoid Workplace Conflicts by Karen Hurt and David Dye. So this is a great book, just came out. So get yourself a book today. All right, Matt, I'll pass it on over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome to everybody joining us today. As Nick had mentioned at the start, we are here to talk a bit about how to maintain the conversation about the importance of a strong compliance program, because there's a lot of stuff happening in the world, a lot of headlines going around, a lot of executive orders flying around, which have unnerved a lot of people, or even just distracted and preoccupied board directors, CEOs, employees who might be wondering, what are we doing with compliance? There's a lot of emphasis on deregulation. That is not necessarily bad. There's a lot of emphasis on lighter regulation. That is not necessarily bad either. There are also announcements like a pause on FCPA enforcement that might leave some people wondering, so what does that mean for our program? There's a lot of other stuff that is still going on in the compliance world. So you have to wonder, how do I figure out how to keep track of the other stuff while also really appreciating and responding to what the Trump administration is doing? We're here to talk about all of that today. We have a couple of great speakers. First is Kristen Auld, and she is Assistant General Counsel at Redwood Materials, which, Kristen, that is a manufacturer and recycler of lithium-ion batteries. Do I have that right?
You're close. We take, if you have a Prius from 20 years ago, the battery in it is probably just about dead. So we take any old lithium-ion batteries. It could be your old Apple iPhone, anything that has a rechargeable battery. We take them, recycle them, turn them back into their original elements. And in the US, we make them back into the remanufactured materials to make new batteries.
All right. And thank you for being there with us today. And also with us is Marianne Wisner. She is counsel at the law firm of Kaplan and Walker, which works with a lot of companies on compliance issues. And Marianne has been a compliance officer herself in earlier parts of her career. Marianne, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And as always, before I ask my first question to the audience, just for everybody who's listening, yes, we will set aside some time at the end for questions. So if you have them and you want to pop them into the Q&A function or just into the attendee chat, that's fine. However, if you ask a really good question, feel free to do that whenever it pops into your mind, and we will see if we can get to it whenever it rolls around, and we'll put it to our audience and try and make it as interactive as possible. So all of that said, I wanted to, I guess, begin with a question that just kind of sets the table for what's going on now, that clearly the Trump administration is rolling back enforcement of some longstanding compliance duties and priorities. I guess I'm curious, how much is that likely to disrupt what compliance functions do on a daily basis? Or is it too soon to tell all of that? But Kristen, I'll ask you first, and then Marianne and Nick, like, what do you think about all of this so far, and what does it mean?
So I think it might be a little bit too soon to tell, but I think in the immediate term, it has not changed anything. And the, message for us has really been that instead of really looking at, we need to do this because it's the law, or because we're going to face an enforcement action and it's going to slow down our operations, the compliance cell for me at Redwood has always been, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. And so there's a lot more buy-in from our senior management, maybe a little bit of a different perspective from our board, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think that perspective of, well, yep, we want to, innovate and move fast and break things, but we also want to do what's right. So that as we're growing this company, we're actually able to maintain our reputation. We have a global outlook. And so I think, it would be very short-sighted to rely on some statements that the Trump administration has made about rolling back enforcement and taking away, good compliance work that's already been done. And I think in terms of our board's view, it's been very much, really wanting to have that investor confidence. And so having a strong compliance program has been a key to that.
All right. Marianne, give us your take. And I don't know what you're counseling on clients. What are your clients telling you? What do you hear around the water cooler? What would you say?
I think it's important for compliance officers to get out in front of this issue. to explain for all the reasons Kristen just did why it's important to keep a strong compliance program and couch it in your risks, your mission, your goals. Mm-hmm. It's a 180-day pause. It's not, you haven't lifted the law. The law is still on the books. There's a 5 and 6 year statute of limitations, depending on how you as a charging attorney write your charging documents. And so I think you want to help steer your management toward a lower risk path. They don't want to give up the gains that they've made.
I like that phrase, steering it toward a lower risk path. And I think that's a good way to frame it, is that this is not about complying with the law. This is about being able to address risks that are going to cause us problem. Some of it might be with the law, but a lot of it might not be. But Nick, what's your take on, either what compliance officers are saying or your initial impressions on how we're trying to get a grip on what's going on?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is there's just like a lot of anxiety right now because, some of these things seem heavy handed and some of these things, maybe are, signaling like a very drastic change. I do agree with Kristen that, these programs are still crucial and the disruption is probably most likely going to be a lot less than what we expect. I like that phrase of like steering management. And I think this, anytime there's change, it creates a lot of opportunity, if we can see it and if we have the courage to like take advantage of it. And I think the compliance departments that have, oversampled or overly focused on just kind of regulatory compliance to the extent that they've tied their value to just kind of pain avoidance, keeping the company out of trouble, that sort of like base level self-preservation, value. If your whole value, as determined by the rest of the organization is really tied to that one sort of singular dimension, I think you're in a more vulnerable position. However, if you've oversampled that, and that's been sort of the basis for your talk tracks historically, now is, there's no better time than now to take advantage of this change to really kind of start focusing on and framing out your impact more to that broader risk management and really trying to optimize our compliance strategies. Like, again, I think our value is not just in pain avoidance, it's also in efficiency and it's also in effectiveness, right? Those second and third order impacts that a culture of integrity can generate that can drive, a more sustainable bottom line, higher velocity of growth on the top line. Those are the things that we're ultimately influencing. And now is a perfect time to kind of buttress our position, I think, and help to reframe in the minds of our, stakeholders what the real angle of ethics and compliance is and can be. Because again, if we're just focused on defensiveness, if we're just focused on, pain avoidance, avoiding fines, whatever, of course, very important, of course, relatively more easy to quantify. But I think we leave a lot of impact and influence on the table when, we're relegated to that single dimension in the minds of our stakeholders.
So I'd like to first ask the attendees in the audience listening today, if you just want to pop in some observations of your own in the chat, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well about what are other parts of the enterprise actually saying? Is this something they're talking about at all? Are they showing up and saying, hey, I heard I don't have to listen to compliance anymore because nobody's enforcing anything? Are they saying we're still with you, or are they coming to you to ask what's going on? I would welcome any frontline dispatches from the attendees if you want to give us your sense in the attendee chat, and I'll try and weave in some of those messages. But maybe I'll ask the sort of the same question again in a slightly different way: is what are the conversations that other parts of the enterprise are having, or what do you think that their response is? Kristen and Marianne, what are you hearing? Are management teams talking about this? Are they looking to you for guidance? Are we all saying, let's wait 3 or 4 months and see what's happening? I'll go in the same order, Kristen and then Marianne. What else are you hearing from other parts of the enterprise, not just what compliance people think?
Sure. So I think on the operations side, and, I realize that if folks are sitting in financial services where I sat, before this role, it can be a bit different. But, in the manufacturing space, at least, the operations team are really looking at whether any of these changes are going to impact our ability to move quickly. And so I think that has been one of the primary concerns and what we might be able to expect. So I think especially in our environmental health and safety teams, they're looking at whether any of our applications will likely be slowed down. And so I think the expectation and sort of the level setting that they're putting with management is that some of the things that are very important to us may be moving at a much slower pace than we're used to, just based on the change and the messaging from the current administration.
Marianne, what would you say?
I think depending on the group, I mean, internal audit, perhaps certain parts of finance, they're going to have a very similar understanding of this new pendulum swing than, say, sales and people who are farther removed. And the conversation is, and was even before Trump's election, is, compliance is onerous. Compliance takes a lot of time. This is a welcome change. And so I think it would be helpful, as I said, to get out in front to explain that, it doesn't really change that much, that the law is still on the books. You can be prosecuted in the next administration. This administration may quite likely flip-flop on its enforcement decision. Mm-hmm. And that the parties who you supply, the parties you work with, are going to want you to make the same representations about your bribery program. So it's just, I think, puts a burden on the shoulders of compliance officers to explain why what you still have is really necessary, and how you're going to continue to try and streamline it and take the burden off of them. But you do want to explain that a lot of this may well be bluster.
Nick, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I forgot the question, actually.
I guess,
I'm honest, okay?
I'm trying to get at is whether employees outside of the compliance function,
yes,
how are they responding to this?
So there's a great comment in the chat from Terry. Hey, Terry, thanks for sharing this. This is I think, this is a potential picture for what a lot of us will likely see if we sort of stand on 10 toes down, standing on our values. I think regardless of the executive orders, or regardless of the interpretation of the changing weather pattern in the organization or in the country, I think our workforce, all of us, we still value highly working in a culture of integrity. We still want to work at an organization that we're proud to work at, one where we don't feel stupid putting our gifts to work toward the pursuit of that organization's noble mission. So Terry just said, we sent out an all-employee email about the FCPA executive order. We quickly got multiple notes from employees thanking us that we are reinforcing the requirement to follow the law and to do business with integrity. In other words, nothing has changed for us. We even received a note from the CEO thanking us for putting that communication together. So in the absence of clarity, I think people are looking for a lighthouse in the storm. And to the extent that the foundation that they've been standing on are a collection of values that they think are real or are approximately real, this change is a great opportunity to reinforce and remind everybody where we as an organization stand. Everybody else may be doing different things, but we mean what we say about our culture of integrity. We're really trying to follow it. And we can rationalize it for, some of the reasons that Marianne said, or some of the things that Kristen said, that the statute of limitation extends beyond, the term of a president and so forth. All of those are logical reasons why we shouldn't take our eye off of the compliance ball. Absolutely, we should do those. But I think we need to complement those with sort of some of these softer, more subjective things and demonstrate our commitment to these values that we claim, matter and that guide us.
Here's another great comment that jumps out to me. Somebody saying, our compliance program is based on our values, and we have always delivered that message. We are not organizationally moving away from our values and culture. I think that is a great starting point. And then related to that, somebody else, I was talking with them, they said this is really about a company's risk tolerance. And okay, maybe your enforcement risk for a violation has gone down. So you might not necessarily have a big, full-throated, in white-collar investigation law firm at $2,200 an hour investigate it and rack up millions. Instead, they were honest. I might not even self-report it, but I'm still going to clean it up because tolerance for not getting enforced is one thing, but tolerance of corruption is not something I want in my business. Right. Because once they think they can cheat my customers, they're going to wind up thinking they can cheat me. And so to that extent, he's like, we are still telling them the policies haven't changed, the bribery hasn't changed, don't you do it, all of this stuff. And I did think that was a really good way to frame it. I'm just curious how many compliance functions are in fact trying to base it all on that. What are the risks? What are the values we uphold? And not necessarily this specific law that may or may not be turned up or down depending on what executive order comes along. I don't know. Kristen, give me some thoughts about that and how easy or difficult it is to talk in these kind of somewhat corny terms, honestly, that, this is about our integrity and our values, which I get that it makes sense, but I could see sometimes, management's being like, well, yeah, but, what does it cost? That kind of thing. What would you say to that?
I think that it's spot on. And I don't think it's corny. Hopefully that doesn't make me a corny person, but I think that it resonates much more with corporate executives that in terms of longevity, in terms of what we actually stand for, in terms of how we're going to do business, as opposed to we need to do this, otherwise we're going to get in trouble. And I was speaking to our European business development folks about the changes in the US. And obviously we're looking at this from a much more global perspective. And, I think that from a global standpoint and having, worked at a number of global organizations, I just don't envision companies being so short-sighted and so narrow-minded as to say, this is, the state of play in the US, or this is now viewed as somewhat acceptable, so we're going to change everything that we've done. Instead, I would expect much more companies to, if not unify together, to actually take a hard stand that, just because there are other companies, other places who are gaining an advantage by acting in corrupt manners, that, we should all cheat on the test so we get an A. I think it's, actually doing the right thing to achieve long-term success.
Marianne, what would you say to this? Or what advice would you give to compliance officers who might think that, okay, I get the theory of having this conversation, but it might seem, I don't know. Kristen certainly said it sounds easier than I thought, which is wonderful to hear. But what would you say, Marianne?
I think management has to continue to pound on integrity, corporate, company-wide. You can talk about it in public forums. You can write the annual letter. I think you still need to keep that emphasis up on integrity. You may not need to necessarily spend quite as much on it, but I think you still need to emphasize that it's important as senior management, and that I do think people are more proud and put more effort in when your employees do that, when you are in a company with a lot of integrity. Mm-hmm. And I think your turnover drops too. And so climate will impact culture. And if your management keeps its high integrity climate and culture, I think other parts of your business will fall into place and improve, stay or continue to improve.
Marianne, maybe as a lawyer, you could also give me some thoughts on this. But, the other thing that I think about a lot is that other laws, we've all been hung up on the FCPA now for a good 20 minutes. And we should remember there are other laws to comply with. And I'm thinking of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau if you're in financial services. Yes, that agency is in the deep freeze, but the law is still there, just like the FCPA is. But state attorneys general can bring their own enforcement under that federal law. The law is structured that way. Or if you are a healthcare business, there's a lot of HIPAA that could be brought and enforced at state level. So I still also think that like there's a big argument to be made that enforcement is going to come from a different direction, but it's still enforcement. And, you know, could you just talk to us, Marianne, a bit about, you know, how to think that through as well? I'm assuming there's still plenty of enforcement risks out there.
Oh, I think there are plenty of enforcement risks. I used to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission in enforcement. So I was also at the DOJ for a year, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And so you've got, you've got money laundering, you've got books and records, you've got a whole variety of ways to charge misconduct if that's what you as regulatory agency are doing. If, for example, you've been told not to charge FCPA, there's still a panoply of things to charge for same or similar conduct. You have to write your indictment differently, or you have to write your complaint differently. So the conduct can just be framed differently in charging documents. If it's misconduct, I think it's going to get charged.
Yeah. And I guess another question I had, and, you know, Nick, maybe I'll start with you here, and then Kristen, and then Marianne. So I'll tell this story for the listeners that I was at a panel discussion earlier this week, and this current panel has already heard my story here. But one of the speakers was a lawyer who does outsourced compliance for tech startups in the Boston area. And he told the story that a lot of my clients, they come up with really great, impressive technology. And then they turn to me and say, we want to sell this to Mass General Hospital or Harvard University or some other large teaching hospital academic institution. And he says, that's great. There are 20 different executives at your target customer who are all looking for some reason to say no to you. And they're going to be worried about privacy. They're going to be worried about data security, financial reliability. And the more I thought about it, from the institution's perspective, I get it. That's good vendor risk management. We have talked about that a dozen times on this Ethicsverse. But their vendor risk management is your startup company, your enterprise risk management. And it's for everybody else that if you build a strong compliance program, you become a more attractive third party to your customer base. So there's a certain just raw commercial need to be able to keep your act together here. Nick, tell me what you think about that, and then maybe Kristen and then Marianne. But like, I think we overlooked that point.
Yeah, we do overlook it. And I think entrepreneurs often underestimate the difficulty in breaking into this space in particular. This space has a high level of risk aversion. That's what we're wired for. It's how we sort of acclimate to the world. And I kind of call this the pool party effect. You know, it's like if Mass General shows up to your pool party and nobody's in the pool, they're not going to be the first one in the pool. No one's the first person in the pool at a pool party. Okay. Like you get in the pool if there's other people in the pool. So, you know, it's kind of like the IBM effect. You don't get fired for picking IBM. If there's enough sort of like, you know, social proof, so to speak, around that, then that makes people more comfortable. To your point, as the organization gets bigger, there's a wider swath of people that could disrupt a deal and, you know, throw a wrench in the program. But you also kind of talk about, so it's just difficult to sell into the space. Just in general, it's really difficult for new entrants. There's a bunch of, you know, startups with VC money that have struggled to like get to profitability because they haven't been able to hit that like critical mass. So that's kind of one issue. The other thing that you talked about, though, I think is really spot on and is yet another opportunity that we need to kind of bring into the conversation to really elevate our programs and elevate our impact. There is, again, a lot of second and third order impacts to a strong ethics and compliance program or a strong culture of integrity. And if we're not incorporating things like the vendor risk, de-risking us from a vendor perspective to other clients, well, then that's, you know, additional benefits, additional upside that our program is creating that we are leaving on the table and not bringing into the conversation to like reframe what we're doing. So there's 1,000 different ways that we can reframe ourselves to executives, depending on what our business is, what challenges we're facing, and so forth. So I'll kind of pause there. But again, if we're thinking about ethics and compliance as a bumper sticker on the car, then we're never gonna ascend to what we can be. It's going to take us, the impetus is on us. It's going to take us, to exhibit that high agency behavior to shift that frame that's in the minds of people in our organization. And one other thing I'll say, sorry about this, but like in a time of change like this, everybody complains about their compliance budget. They don't have enough budget. Well, like in a time like this, that small budget is actually an asset for you. It's a lot easier to reframe to say, hey, you're already down to bone here. There's nothing to cut here. And if you compare what the organization is spending against the massive benefit that we're having from a regulatory, risk avoidance perspective, from an efficiency standpoint, whatever, that's a lot easier to make the case to avoid cuts, just given the arithmetic of our department size relative to the top line of our organization.
So, Kristen, give me your thoughts on this. And there's the idea that framed correctly, compliance really can be shown to be a good strategic advantage for a business that's looking to woo skeptical customers. Or I personally think there's a lot of overlap between, say, FCPA and anti-fraud programs, such as embezzlement or something, which, yes, it's against the law, but a company just doesn't want to have employees embezzling. But a lot of the controls are really the same. And there's a lot of just inherent value in having strong compliance capabilities. But how do you, as a compliance officer, how do you frame that conversation? How easy is it to win over management teams or employees? And especially in this tumultuous environment right now, what's that like, do you think?
I think that there are times when executives can get really caught up in the business objective, right? All they want to think about is how quickly can I become profitable? How quickly can I sell my product to some huge vendor, somebody who really wants what we have to sell? And how quickly can we get there, right? Let's put all of our money into engineering. Let's put all of our money into building things quickly. And then the problem is that once you start talking to your potential customers, if you don't have your house in order, you have a mess. And so, and you can't sell it, right? Like this is exactly what you were hearing from the other panel that you were in. And if you get to that point where, all you've been thinking about and all the executives have been thinking about is let's move quickly. We have to do this business and, compliance, whatever, let's not worry about anything from a regulatory perspective or, having any formal processes in place, you end up not being able to do business. And so by, sometimes gently informing your executive team that if you can think 3 steps ahead, what's going to happen when you're ready to go to market with this, or a huge corporation wants to talk to you and buy our product, some of the things they're going to be asking are, do you have an anti-bribery, anti-corruption program in place? Show us a copy of your code of conduct. All of these questions come up in requests for information from our customers. They come up anytime companies want to raise money, whether it's through,
Exactly.
Series B, C, D. All of that's going to come up in due diligence. It comes up if you're trying to do any kind of debt financing. If you don't have your house in order, you are going to fail. And so part of that business success is on the side and moving in parallel with building your company. If you're not building the right processes, if you're not going to be slowed down, you're going to come to a dead stop until you build it up.
Okay,
it's just part of the success.
Let me just ask, that is a very compelling argument to make from our perspective here in compliance land, but in your experience, and maybe Marianne, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Is it a tough argument to make with management teams, or do they kind of say, yeah, we get that, we'll pay attention to this as well? What do you think?
It can be a very tough sell initially. And then when things actually start to happen, when those deals want to be made, when you want to start doing any kind of bigger financing, anytime you actually want to move your business in a major way, and someone's saying, oh, well, where's our bribery and corruption program? Or, your board sits down and says, we absolutely have to focus on this because, in fact, if this gets messed up, you won't raise another dollar. And so suddenly the executives are, scared straight, I guess. I think I wish I was joking. But, I think that it really does it can be a very difficult climb, but at some point that need for business to move forward and for compliance to exist and do what it needs to do ultimately converge.
Marianne, give us your take on this as well. Like from our perspective here, like I said before, in compliance land, everything Kristen just laid out sounds great and perfectly sensible. But for people not in compliance land, in your observation, how difficult is it to get them to follow along with us?
So I think an explanation of tiered risks is helpful.
Sure.
An FCPA case can be a business buster. It can be a material disclosure. How I phrased it in the past is your FCPA costs, if you're in trouble, are way up here. All the other risks that you're talking about are kind of down here. And so that exponential risk that an FCPA liability can cause should be taken into account. When I was in-house and we did sell products, we wanted to be the most trusted vendor. And so one of our risks was shipping products from A to B. And how did we make sure that what we produced retained its integrity between A and B? And so I went out to all the shipping companies and interviewed them. And did a pretty in-depth verbal interview with all of them and then had them give me annual updates. And on the riskier ones, I would go back quarterly. But that I sold to my executives as a selling point that they could tell their sales staff that, we really are giving you products that are not adulterated, that are strong. And so my vendor had to have a really good compliance program. We had to ensure that, and we sold it as that, or it could be sold as that. So I don't think dropping your compliance program or working with other parties that don't have a strong compliance program is going to benefit your business in the end. And I heartily agree with, what Kristen just said too.
So Nick, give me your take on this. And, I'm always going to default to the point that I'm still skeptical. A lot of C-suites get it, that a strong compliance capabilities are a strategic advantage. They might say that it'll help us out of a jam when the jam comes, but it's not here. So I'll worry about it tomorrow.
Well, I think there's two.
We're excited.
Yeah, I think there's two layers, though, to it. And you just wrote an article about this recently with that LRN study that came out. And so we've been talking about this concept a little bit of like ethical overconfidence. And that, you had this quote in that article that I think sums it up. Read the article, though, okay? What's striking here is that there's almost a perfect linear correlation between your place in the org and how much you do or don't believe your organization's ethical culture. So as you go higher up in the organization, the percent of respondents in the survey had higher scores with respect to like ethical culture existing or, fair treatment across, discipline, whatever. So that ethical overconfidence exists. And so when you couple the maybe lack of clarity around, at the executive level, the lack of clarity around like what the true, whether there is a even strategic lever to be had in compliance, and you couple that with like the overconfidence, the odds are that they don't see the opportunity there. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're like, well, we do have a culture of integrity, but then you go to a frontline worker and they're saying, only 40% of respondents are giving thumbs up on the culture of integrity. Yep. So those are two kind of impediments to like getting that light bulb that we're always talking about on the Ethicsverse turned on, because when the light bulb's on, to Marianne's point, you get a lot more endorsement. But Marianne said a really key word in when she was, describing what she just described. She said, like, I was able to sell that to management. And so again, we have to understand that like every mountain can be climbed. It might be hard. Every lock can be picked. It might be hard, but there's a way over, around, under, through whatever impediment is in your way. And if that impediment is the mindset of executives, you just have to figure out a way to connect what we're doing to something that they care about. So if, hey, you said you wanted to be the highest integrity vendor, I'm going to take you for your word there. In order for us to ensure that in the context of our complex operation, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Again, if we can root it down to something they care about, we can usually, the odds of us getting their endorsement is a lot higher. One last point. Someone was talking about this at our live event yesterday. These live events are phenomenal. Like, I learned so much yesterday, and I was just kind of a fly on the wall stuffing food in my mouth. But the point is, when we have a network of our counterparts at our competitors, for example, if we're taking advantage of that, we can take advantage and utilize the information asymmetry that we have. A lot of organizations, most all executives that I know, they all want to know what their competitors are doing. So if you have friends at a couple of different, counterparts, when you go to try to sell that idea, and you can come with, you can come into that conversation loaded with some actionable information that they don't have. That's maybe in line with what you want to do. Hey, everybody else is doing this. We need to kind of stay the course, or say, hey, somebody over here that I know got in trouble for this, and we want to really kind of tie down to our values. The point is, if we have to create the circumstances for our own success. And a lot of that can come from our network, or, reading Matt's blog, or, coming to things like this. If we can come with some extra information, some insights that they don't have, if we can incorporate this statistically significant, stable, confirmation of this ethical overconfidence, well, then those are all things that can add tailwinds to our persuasion path.
Another question.
I just wanted to add one point to add also is, if somebody does adopt your tech startups, that really works, that is also really helpful information to know. And if you get,
great point,
you find it helpful, that way you can perhaps streamline your program and reduce your spend. So it's important to keep your network up for that reason too.
Great point.
One question I wanted to put maybe to all of the listeners in the audience, just maybe on a scale of 1 to 5 or something like that, how much are you also worried specifically about state regulators? I'm thinking about that a lot these days, because clearly some states, such as New York and California, they see this as the feds are creating a power vacuum that the states are more than happy to fill with their own regulatory agenda and enforcement. But, you also have a lot of privacy regimes at the state level. I am never going to believe that we will adopt a federal privacy law in the United States. But I think we're going to see something similar with AI, and we're probably going to see something similar with cybersecurity. And I'm almost not even sure where the lines are anymore between what's AI versus cyber versus a privacy risk. But if you have 50 small agencies all punching at you in little directions versus one federal government that could throw a haymaker punch, so you're still going to need strong compliance capabilities. Like, what are my risk assessment capabilities? How am I monitoring regulatory change? How am I performing gap assessments? In that kind of thing. And so I would be curious how much the listeners worry about states. All right, I said 1 to 5. I see some 5s. I see a 2. I don't know who said a 2. A lot of 4s, a lot of 5s.
I even saw a 6 slip in there.
Well, I mean, that sounds like pretty bad. All right. But, that's something else that I think about as well is, the compliance capabilities you're going to need to navigate here. Kristen, maybe if you could give me some thoughts, not necessarily just on how much you worry about states or other regulators, Europe or somebody else, but, how do you figure out, therefore, I will need strong risk assessment or regulatory change or due diligence capabilities or something like that? Kristen, how do you think about those kind of questions?
So we have some pretty active state and local regulators that we have been dealing with and continue to. And so I think that because they have been so active, and I would think will continue to be, they are very much viewed as, a necessary evil, if you will, and that's part of the business. And so, those regulatory actions are always top of mind. But I think, there are kind of two tools that have been really helpful for me, and I think for our company, and especially with sort of valuing compliance and helping us to move forward in a thoughtful way. And one of those is to really create, or to explain compliance as having a right-sized compliance program for your company, right? Okay. I came from financial services. The risk tolerance and the risks are very different in manufacturing than they are in a compliance department in financial services. And so being able to say, look, I'm not trying to create the same compliance program that I've had at a bank or that I've had somewhere else, because this is different and this is a smaller company. There are different risks. And so to sort of look at all of the different tenets of a corporate compliance program and the federal sentencing guidelines that lay out all of those tenets, and to say, here's where we are right now. And here's what the gold standard would be. And here's what, would really be the acceptable right size for our company at this point in time. That may grow later. There may be other parts that are much more important than, one of the other tenants right now. Maybe we're doing very well in another part. And I think the other part that we think about a lot, and this feeds into regulatory interactions, is really being able to provide the board and senior management with metrics and data. The more things that you can actually produce to show them information that they didn't know before, or wouldn't be able to get from a meeting that's just about a product or just about progress in a certain areas of operations, is so helpful and goes a long way, because they're realizing, even, if someone says, well, I don't want to talk about risk, or I don't want to think about it. And then you provide them with this data and they're able to go, oh, well, I didn't realize that was happening, or I didn't realize how much we were talking to regulators. It becomes an important part of the business conversation.
Well, they don't know everything that's happening, to your point. We have to bring that into the conversation, right?
Well, I mean, that's fascinating, Kristen, when you said so-and-so might say, I don't want to know about risk. And my first thought then was, really, dude, what planet do you live on that you might not want to know that? Because going back to the discussion I had earlier this week here in Boston, a lot of the compliance speakers were saying, how much of a program do we need? What is the right size? Well, it depends, management, on how much risk you are willing to take. Your management, you get to make those decisions, and we can tell you the consequences if this happens or this other thing happens, if we do or we don't. But you, the compliance person, can't manage the risk unless the management team first says, this is what our risks are. This is what we really worry about more than everything else. We only have 2 or 3 big priorities, not 10. There's some others there. I do think it's a really excellent point that you raised, Kristen, about collecting the right data to be able to have productive conversations with seniors, executives about risk. But ultimately, I don't know that you really, how much compliance officers can be that helpful if management isn't thinking about, these are the risks that matter most to us. These are the priorities that matter most to us. And from there, you can say, all right, now I'm going to reverse engineer the compliance program we need. And now it's right sized. I've been babbling for a while. I'll stop. But Marianne, maybe give us some of your thoughts about how you would help compliance teams figure out what is the right sized compliance program. Like, they need it, but what's the process they would go through to figure out this is the right size?
So first of all, I think the group needs to be educated on what the compliance laws and regulations are, at least generally, to the risks as you as the compliance officer know it. And that'll set the stage for the conversation. What is the right size, and what risk management do you want to undertake with your new business development, or how you're structuring your privacy program, or how you're structuring your cyber? and take it from there. I don't think there's a vacuum. I think every compliance program needs to be very well tailored to the risks and the growth opportunities that are in front of the client, in front of the company, because you also want to have something that will grow with and adjust to the risks as you see them coming.
Here's a great comment from somebody. I hear that a lot. A startup company in particular, they have zero compliance program, and therefore they are hesitant to even take a look at what their risks are, because once you look, you can't unsee it. And now you know what you have to do, which they would prefer not to do. I don't know. Nick, give me some of your thoughts here about how to prod executives on, you need to make a decision about what your risk tolerance is, what our ethical priorities are. From there, compliance officer, can do all sorts of stuff, but if they don't frame that for you, you're kind of just swimming around in circles, I guess. But
right.
What would you say to that, Nick?
I would, again, it's kind of a theme here, but like, I think it's our job to guide them. And I think we need to make it easy for them to give us the information we need to like run forward, so we're not just swimming in circles, like you said. So you can do small, medium, large. You can say Ferrari, Cadillac, bicycle, right? Like, you got to just get some guidance, because it is hard to quantify risk. If you ask someone, what's your risk appetite? Like, what are they going to do? Give you a number? Like, you can't even quantify it like that. It's kind of an ethereal thing. And so sometimes I think we come to these conversations with too much technical upfront, too much details upfront, too much about the trade-offs upfront. I think we need to have that kind of information and the trade-offs between the bicycle and the Cadillac, for example, but let that conversation be organic. I think we just need kind of a direction. And I think there's a lot more freedom in what we're talking about than we think. This is not like we're dropping an artillery shell, crossing our fingers and hoping that we did the right trigonometry so it hits the target. This is an ongoing process, and we're kicking off this process. And like Marianne said, the risks are going to change. The business is going to change. The program itself is going to have to flex and pivot over time. So I just think we need to just get enough to take that next step and get enough buy-in so that they feel like they're part of the process, and that they feel like we're executing a bespoke program in the context of our organization's risk appetite, our regulatory landscape, and so forth. So again, I think there's a path to guide them. I think we can make it simple if we have the courage to do that. And it's on us to be the Sherpa. Our businesses are climbing this mountain of risk. We're the ones that are meant to guide them, and we're the ones that are meant to, if we go to them and we say, so what should be in our risk assessment? Well, they're like, well, that's what I hired you for. You should know what should go in the risk assessment and how to quantify that. So I think it takes that kind of collaboration, and I think it takes us, having the courage, like I said, to guide them through the process and make it easy for them to give us the answers that we need.
Here is a comment from a listener. They're saying that I do platinum, gold, and bronze options for the executive team, with pros and cons for each one. Keep it high level so they understand enough to make good decision, and then potentially to guide them to your preference or your preferred option there. Marianne, you gave one really good phrase that I liked a lot, where you talked about giving them a line of sight into what the risks are, which Great. I think also ties into what Kristen had been talking about with providing some data and some analytics, but that's how you get the line of sight. And I do think that both of those ideas, if you put them together, they really frame up what a compliance officer can do here to help businesses understand this is the actual activity going on in our company, and all the other stuff going on in the world that could have dire consequences, maybe not, we're not sure. And now you, management, what do you want? Do you want the platinum? Do you want the bronze? Do you want the gold? I think that would be a good way to frame it all. I guess, one last question I would give is, since we have about 5 minutes, I'll put it to Kristen first, and then Marianne, and then Nick. How much are you going, I guess, how do you think this is going to change over the next year or 2 years or 4 years with the Trump administration in particular? But, maybe there are lots of other business risks out there. There's a lot of other regulation in the EU and whatnot. do you expect that we are going to have a difficult time year over year every year trying to articulate the importance of having a good compliance program? Is this going to get harder to make this argument over the next couple of years, do you think? Kristen, I'll put it to you, and then to Marianne, and then to Nick.
I think it may change. I think that there may be different skills that are needed actually in this period of time. And I don't think that the overall need will change, but I think that right now we've seen so much change, and I expect that there will be more change, moving back on things, moving aggressively forward in other areas. And so I think part of the role of the compliance officer will really be able to stay on top of emerging risks and to highlight those for the board and for the executive team, and also to really be able to just continue to identify where the risk areas are as things change with tariffs, and to really tie these potential changes and compliance issues back to business needs.
All right. Marianne, what would you say about what's to come?
I think the pendulum's going to swing around a bit on where the administration is going with its enforcement priorities. And I think you as a compliance officer need to stay attuned to that and what to expect. At the same time, the more you know your business, the more you can articulate what the pendulum swings mean to the business.
Right.
And say what the new AI capabilities in data focuses, our collection efforts are. I think in 4 years, depending on the new administration, you may whirl back to where you were in November. So it's just gonna be an interesting ride.
All right.
For the next few years.
Nick, I'll give it to you for the last word. We got about 2 minutes here. What are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just think like you're kind of asking, Nick, how hard is it going to be for you to go to the gym in October, every morning? And that's going to kind of depend on if I'm going to the gym every morning right now. Like if I can develop that kind of habit, it's going to be easier for me to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym in October. If October is the first time I'm doing it, well, then that's going to be really hard. And so again, I just think like we're kind of all at this crossroads. Like it feels like, we have a very hard job. It's a thankless job in many cases. In many cases, people don't see the impact that we're doing. They don't see the weight of the world that we're carrying on our shoulders. And I think right now is, we're standing at this crossroads as we're kind of stepping into this new era. And if we continue to do things the way that we've been doing them, well, then we're going to continue to have the same results over the next 10 years. I think, though, if we can show up, like Kristen was saying, and like Marianne was saying, deeper understanding of the business, more courage and confidence to have those conversations to like reframe what image or what impression they have of us, then I think that starts to build on itself. And we just get more and more fluent in that kind of a language. And we start to see more and more opportunities for us to, exert our influence and power. And we see more and more situations where our impact can be traced back to our efforts. It really does build on itself. Things grow little by little and then all at once. So what I would say is we have to start doing things differently. We have to have that courage to reframe it. And we have to understand that it's on us to turn those light bulbs on at the top. Look, this stuff is going to keep changing, right? There's going to be another president in 4 years-ish. We're going to have, as Marianne said, this pendulum might swing it with respect to like how they enforce and so forth. So I think we have to keep going to the gym. We have to stay nimble, and we have to start building some of these other skills that Kristen talked about. If it's going to be easy for us in October to go to the gym, you know what I mean?
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. But
we'll have to leave it there.
Kristen Old, Marianne Wisner, this has been a great conversation. Thank you both, and thank you to all the attendees.
Yeah, one more emoji explosion for these guys. Phenomenal. You guys, thank you so much for your insights, your wisdom. We got a real treat next week. We got the one and only Allison Taylor coming on, and we're going to be talking about, what are we talking about? Navigating ethics and navigating during turbulent times. So she's coming on. Bring your friends, bring your team. Hide this from all of your enemies. We don't want our enemies getting smarter. And we'll see you guys next week. Love you all.
Thank you.